The year was 1896, and the Missouri borderlands stretched wide and lonely under a sky painted red by the dying sun. Elias Boone rode his old mare, June, along a winding dirt road, the sound of her hooves the only rhythm in the silence. His coat was torn, his boots caked in dust, and his eyes carried the weight of too many miles and too few destinations. For days, he had followed the river south, searching for honest work or, at least, a warm bed. His last coin had been spent on coffee 3 towns back, and he'd been surviving on creek water and determination since. Just as darkness swallowed the horizon, he spotted something ahead. A flicker of yellow light, faint but steady, coming from the bend in the road. When he reached it, a weathered wooden sign swung lazily in the cold wind. The lantern's rest, hot meals, and safe beds. The words sounded like salvation. The tavern sat at the edge of the forest, its wooden beams sagging with age, but its windows glowing with warmth. Smoke curled from the chimney, carrying the smell of stew and wood fire. Elias dismounted and tied June to the post, brushing the rain from his coat. As he stepped inside, the door creaked, and the warmth embraced him like an old friend. Behind the counter stood Mrs. Abby Whitlock, a stout woman in her 50s with silver streaks in her hair and the kind of face that had smiled more than it had frowned. "Welcome, traveler," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "You've come just in time for supper." "I'd be grateful for a hot meal and maybe a bed for the night," Elias replied, his voice rough from disuse. "You'll have both," she said with a gentle nod. "We take care of wanderers here." Something about the way she said it, soft but heavy, made Elias wonder what kind of wanderers she'd seen before. The main room glowed with lamplight. 4 others sat at the long table, a railroad worker with coal-stained hands, a young widow dressed in black, an old preacher, and a boy barely 16 who stared quietly at his bowl. Abby served them steaming stew and thick slices of bread. "Eat," she said. "Storm's coming tonight." Thunder rolled in the distance as Elias took his seat. The stew was simple but rich: potatoes, beans, a hint of venison. It tasted like home, though Elias hadn't had one in years. The widow spoke softly. "No one travels this road much anymore. They say it's cursed." The preacher nodded grimly. "Cursed or not, it's safer inside than out. These woods have taken more than their share of souls." Elias chuckled uneasily. "I'll take my chances with soup over spirits." But when the wind howled outside and the lamps flickered, he wasn't so sure. After dinner, Elias lingered by the hearth, watching the flames dance. The others retired early, except for the preacher and the widow, who sat whispering at the far end of the room. "They say men who eat here don't make it. Past morning," the preacher murmured. The widow's eyes darted toward Abby, who was polishing glasses at the bar. "You shouldn't say that where she can hear," she whispered back. "She's been through enough." "What do you mean?" the preacher asked. "She lost her husband in the war," the widow said softly. "Since then, strange things have happened here." Elias pretended not to listen, but the hair on his neck stood up. The storm outside roared louder, as if agreeing with their fears. When he finally looked back at the bar, Abby was staring at him. Not angrily, not kindly, but as if she could read his thoughts. When the other guests went upstairs, Elias stayed behind under the excuse of wanting more coffee. He noticed an old guest ledger lying open on the counter. It was filled with names, dates, and towns, all scrawled in different hands. He flipped a few pages back. The entries stopped abruptly 3 months earlier. Half the remaining pages had been torn out. Abby returned from the kitchen, carrying a lamp. "Looking for something, Mr. Boone?" Elias straightened quickly. "Just admiring your fine handwriting." She smiled faintly. "Many travelers pass through. Some don't stay long enough to sign." Her tone was calm, but the words chilled him more than the storm ever could. He thanked her politely and climbed the stairs to his room, trying to shake the unease settling in his gut. The room was small but clean. A single bed, a wash basin, and a lamp flickering against the wall. As the wind howled outside, Elias drifted into a troubled sleep. He dreamt of footsteps echoing down long hallways, of whispers coming from beneath the floorboards. In his dream, voices murmured, "Help us." We never left. The lanterns went out. He awoke with a start, drenched in sweat. His lamp had burned out, and the room was cloaked in black. Somewhere down the hallway, soft footsteps moved, pausing outside his door. Elias reached for his revolver. The footsteps stopped, then faded away. When dawn broke, he wasn't sure if it had been real or just a nightmare. At breakfast, only 2 guests remained, Elias and the young widow. The others had apparently left early, according to Abby. The widow looked pale, her eyes rimmed red. She leaned across the table and whispered, "My husband disappeared on this very road last year." Elias frowned. "You think he stayed here?" She nodded, her fingers trembling. "He sent me a letter. Said he found a warm place to rest, a tavern by the river. Then nothing. No one ever saw him again." From her shawl, she pulled out a rusted locket and placed it in Elias's hand. Inside was a faded picture of a man and a small child. "I found this near the cellar door last night," she whispered. "Be careful. This place doesn't let go." Before Elias could reply, Abby entered with fresh bread and smiled warmly. "You two look like you've seen ghosts." Elias forced a laugh, but his hand closed tightly around the locket. That afternoon, while Abby busied herself in the kitchen, Elias slipped into the parlor and knelt near the hearth. One of the floorboards had been creaking all night, and curiosity burned through his nerves. With his knife, he pried it up, just enough to peek underneath. Something glimmered faintly in the dim light. He reached in and pulled out a spoon, tarnished and engraved with initials, H.W. He checked the locket again. The same initials were etched on its back, Henry Whitlock, Abby's husband. A chill ran through Elias. He turned sharply as a shadow fell over him. Abby stood in the doorway, hands folded, her eyes unreadable. "You shouldn't pry into other folks' business," she said softly. Elias stammered, I dropped something." But she only sighed and walked past him, adding another log to the fire. "Secrets have a way of finding their own light, Mr. Boone," she murmured. "Best not to look too close." That evening, Elias found Abby sitting alone by the fire, her face lit by the dancing flames. Against his better judgment, he sat beside her. "You've been kind to me," he began, "but I have to ask. Those people who vanished, were they your guests?" She looked into the fire for a long moment before speaking. "The world forgets its wanderers," she said quietly. "Drifters, widows, deserters. They come here tired, hungry, and full of sorrow. I give them peace." Her voice trembled slightly, as if she were trying to convince herself. Elias studied her face. She looked more like a grieving mother than a killer. "Peace," he said slowly, "isn't always found in silence." She turned to him then, her eyes glistening. "And yet, silence is all I have left." For the first time, Elias felt pity for her. Something deeper was at play here, something tangled between mercy and madness. After midnight, unable to rest, Elias took his lantern and crept out back. The storm had eased, but the ground was soft and cold. Behind the tavern, he found an old wooden cellar door, half buried in mud. The hinges groaned as he pulled it open. The air below was damp and heavy. The lantern's light revealed rows of shelves, lined not with wine, but with belongings: hats, boots, coats, Travel satchels? Dozens of them. Each item was covered in dust, yet arranged neatly, almost lovingly. Elias's breath caught as he knelt by a mound of freshly turned earth. His hand brushed away the dirt and touched bone. He staggered back, lantern trembling in his grip. From the shadows, a voice said calmly, "I told you, Mr. Boone. You shouldn't have looked." Abby stood at the bottom of the stairs, holding a wooden cross against her chest. Her face was pale, her eyes full of tears. "They were all lost souls," she whispered. "I gave them rest." Elias froze, realizing the truth was far worse and far sadder than he had imagined. For a long moment, neither Elias nor Abby moved. The lantern flame flickered between them, painting her tear-streaked face in gold and shadow. Abby's voice trembled. "You think I murdered them, don't you?" Elias swallowed hard. "You buried them, ma'am. That's all I can see." "They begged me to," she said, clutching the cross tighter. "You don't understand. The world outside broke them. The widow who lost her children, the soldier who couldn't stop hearing the guns, the preacher who lost his faith. They came here hollow, Mr. Boone. I only wanted to help them rest." Her words carried the weight of both guilt and tenderness. Elias glanced around at the mounds of earth, each one a grave carefully tended, not hastily hidden. "Why not call the law? Why not tell someone?" he asked. She smiled sadly. "Because mercy isn't something the law understands." A gust of wind blew through the open door, snuffing out the lantern. In the darkness, Elias heard something. A faint sob, soft and distant, like someone crying beneath the floor. Elias relit the lantern with shaking hands. Its weak flame cast long shadows across the cellar walls. And that's when he saw it. A faint blue shimmer hung in the air near the far corner. At first, it looked like fog, but then it began to take shape. A man's figure, translucent, with eyes full of sadness. Abby gasped and staggered back, her hand covering her mouth. "Henry?" The ghost nodded once, his form flickering like candlelight in wind. Elias recognized the face instantly. It was the man from the widow's locket. "You promised you'd wait for me," the spirit whispered, his voice echoing like wind through a hollow church. Abby fell to her knees. "I tried. When the war took you, I lost everything. I thought, if I could save others from that kind of loneliness, maybe you'd come back." Henry's ghost drifted closer. His eyes, though hollow, carried warmth. "You saved no one, Abby. You trapped them, just like yourself." Her sobs filled the cellar. Elias stood frozen, torn between fear and pity. For the first time he understood. This wasn't evil. This was love twisted by grief. Thunder rumbled overhead, shaking dust from the beams. The lantern swayed, its light flaring wildly. Abby looked up at the ghost of her husband. "What do I do?" she cried. Henry's voice softened. "Set them free, Abby. Let them go home." Rain began to hammer the roof as Elias helped Abby to her feet. "We can dig them up," he said. "Give them each a name, a prayer. Let the world remember them." She nodded through tears. "Yes, yes, that's what they deserve." As they climbed from the cellar, lightning struck the ridge outside, lighting the sky in white fire. The tavern trembled as if the very earth was purging its sorrow. Abby whispered a prayer, one Elias had never heard before, something half scripture, half song. The thunder answered with silence. They worked through the night. For every mound of earth they uncovered, Elias found a token, a photograph, a pocket knife, a rusted ring. And Abby whispered the traveler's name if she remembered it. When dawn came gray and heavy, she carried each keepsake to the river. There, she set small lanterns afloat, one by one, lighting them with trembling hands. "The light will guide them," she said. "They've been waiting so long." Dozens of lanterns drifted away, their reflections rippling across the water. Elias stood beside her, his hat pressed against his chest. As the last lantern vanished around the bend, the clouds above began to part. The first sunlight in days spilled across the valley, turning the river gold. For the first time since he'd met her, Abby smiled. Not the polite smile she gave her guests, but one of release. The young widow emerged from the tavern doorway, her eyes swollen from crying. She had seen everything: the graves, the lights, the ghost. When she approached Abby, her voice was gentle. "My husband was one of them, wasn't he?" Abby hesitated, then nodded. "He came here broken, same as the others. He spoke of you and the child every night before he—" She stopped herself, wiping her eyes. The widow reached for Abby's hand. "Then thank you for keeping him safe until now." Abby wept silently. Elias helped the widow pack her things that morning. As they left, the tavern seemed smaller, quieter. The storm had washed the mud clean from its walls. But when they turned back for one last look, Abby was gone. Only her shawl hung over the porch railing, fluttering in the morning breeze. Weeks later, Elias rode back through the Borderlands. When he reached the ridge where the tavern had stood, he stopped in shock. The building was gone. Nothing remained but foundation stones and a few broken planks scattered by the river. He asked a nearby farmer about it. The man shook his head. "You must have heard wrong. There's been no tavern out here in 20 years. Place burned down back in '76. Elias stared at him, heart pounding. "But I ate there, met the keeper, the guests." The farmer laughed softly. "You must have seen a ghost, friend." That night, as Elias camped near the ruins, he looked toward the river and saw something. Faint points of light floating across the water, dozens of them, moving like drifting stars. He removed his hat and whispered, "Rest easy, Abby." 10 years later, Elias, now gray and weary, returned once more. His travels had taken him across half the country, but he had never forgotten that night at the Lantern's Rest. The road had grown wild again, trees clawed at the sky, and the river ran slower, older. But at the spot where the tavern once stood, he found a stone marker, weather-worn but clearly carved by human hands. It read, "For the lost and the lonely, rest here in light." Elias knelt and placed a lantern at its base. When he lit it, the flame burned steady despite the wind. He closed his eyes and felt a familiar warmth, as though someone stood beside him. A soft voice, like a whisper carried by the river, said, "Thank you, Mr. Boone." He opened his eyes, but no one was there. Still, the air smelled faintly of stew and pinewood smoke. News of the old stone marker spread across the border towns. Travelers, wanderers, and families of the missing began to visit. Some left flowers, others lit candles. A preacher from St. Louis called it the resting place of the forgotten. Newspapers printed small articles about the mysterious drifter who built a memorial to souls who vanished. Elias never claimed credit. He only sat near the river, greeting those who came. "They're not lost," he would say softly. "They're just home." Over the years, people began telling new stories, not of fear and vanishing travelers, but of a woman who guided the broken to peace and a man who helped her set them free. The Lantern's Rest became a tale of redemption, and in that redemption, the Missouri borderlands found hope again. One autumn night, as the leaves burned gold and crimson, Elias sat by his small cabin, lantern flickering beside him. He was older now, his hands frail but steady. He closed his eyes and dreamt. He dreamt of the tavern alive once more, the fire roaring, the table set, bowls of steaming stew waiting. Abby stood behind the counter, smiling the same gentle smile he remembered. Around the table sat the preacher, the widow, the railroad workers. All of them, alive and at peace. Laughter filled the room. Abby approached him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You helped me finish the story, Elias. You showed me mercy." He smiled back. "You gave it first, ma'am. You just didn't know how to let go." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "Now I do. Eat, traveler. You've come a long way." He lifted the spoon, and when he tasted the stew, warmth spread through him like light. The next morning, townsfolk found Elias beneath the old oak by the river, his hat resting on his chest, his eyes peacefully closed. Beside him burned a lantern, bright and steady though no oil filled it. They buried him at the foot of the stone marker. The preacher from St. Louis spoke words that echoed across the valley. No soul truly disappears when remembered with kindness. That night, the river shimmered with floating lights. Some said they saw two figures standing together on the opposite bank, a woman in a shawl and a man with a lantern, their faces serene, guiding travelers through the mist. And on that lonely stretch of the Missouri border, those who passed by after dark swore they always felt safer, as if unseen hands were still tending the fire and lighting the way for the lost.